The Well of Dragons had been transformed into something that challenged the very concept of sacred space. Its ancient volcanic crater reshaped by months of magical engineering into a vast ritual circle whose geometric precision spoke of mathematical principles that operated beyond normal human understanding. Where once natural forces had carved channels through the living rock, now artificial patterns directed energies that had never been meant to interact with the material plane, creating a nexus of power that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. The transformation had not been accomplished without cost. The entire region for miles around showed the effects of the magical workings that had been necessary to prepare the site, with the very landscape bearing scars that would persist for generations. Trees had withered and died in those same geometric patterns that followed the flow of magical energy, while streams had been diverted to create channels that carried not water, but liquid magical force that glowed with an unhealthy phosphorescence. Severin the Red stood at the center of the transformed caldera, his human form barely recognizable after the modifications that had been necessary to allow him to channel the kind of power the Crimson Protocols required. His skin bore ritual scars that glowed with barely contained magical energy, while his eyes had been replaced with crystalline orbs that could perceive magical spectra invisible to normal vision. He was no longer entirely human, having sacrificed piece after piece of his mortality in pursuit of the power needed to serve as a focal point for a working that would remake the fundamental nature of reality. The changes went deeper than mere physical modification. His mind had been altered by exposure to forces that operated according to principles alien to human consciousness, leaving him capable of perceiving and manipulating energies that would have driven a normal person insane. He could feel the flow of magical power through the ritual site like a physical sensation. He could sense the alignment of celestial bodies that would provide the optimal conditions for tearing open the barriers between realms. Around him, arranged in patterns that followed ancient mathematical principles discovered in texts that predated most known civilizations, stood the surviving leadership of the Cult of the Dragon. Each had undergone their own transformations, surrendering aspects of their humanity in exchange for the ability to contribute to a magical working of unprecedented scope. They were no longer quite mortal, but neither were they fully ascended to whatever state awaited those who successfully served as conduits for the divine power. Azbara Jos had become something that existed partially in multiple planes simultaneously. His consciousness stretched across dimensions in ways that allowed him to perceive and manipulate magical forces that operated beyond the normal boundaries of space and time. The cost had been most of his sanity, and all of his capacity for normal human emotion, leaving him as a perfectly efficient magical instrument with no remaining trace of the person he had once been. Frulam Mondath retained more of her human appearance, but her mind had been linked to a network of scrying devices that allowed her to monitor and coordinate cult activities across the entire continent. The magical bandwidth required for such connections had burned away her capacity for independent thought as well, leaving her as a living communication hub whose every action was determined by the collective will of the cult's remaining leadership. The ritual itself had begun 3 days ago, with preliminary workings that established the magical foundations necessary for what was to come. Minor ley lines had been redirected to flow through the Well of Dragons, their combined energy creating a magical field so intense that unprotected humans could not survive within miles of the site. The air itself had become toxic to normal life, filled with energies that converted organic matter into raw magical force needed to fuel the final working. As the astronomical conditions approached their optimal configuration, the effects of the preliminary rituals became visible far beyond the immediate area. Throughout the continent, sensitive individuals reported disturbing dreams filled with visions of cosmic significance they could not understand. Animals fled from entire regions, their instincts warning them of dangers that transcended anything in their evolutionary experience. The weather itself began to reflect the magical disturbances, with storms that moved in patterns that defied natural law and atmospheric phenomena that suggested the normal barriers between different realms of existence were beginning to weaken.
The resonance cascade is approaching critical threshold,
Azbara Jos reported, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple dimensions simultaneously.
The preliminary sites have achieved full synchronization across 7 different planes of existence. We are ready to begin the primary invocation.
Severin nodded, his crystalline eyes tracking magical currents that flowed through the transformed landscape like rivers of liquid starlight. The moment they had worked toward for years was finally at hand. But he found himself surprised by the absence of triumph or satisfaction in his transformed consciousness. The modifications necessary to serve as ritual focus had stripped away most of his capacity for human emotion, leaving only the burning certainty that he was fulfilling his destined purpose. The anticipation of this moment had sustained him through years of setbacks and defeats, had driven him to make sacrifices that his younger self would have found unthinkable. But now that the time had arrived, he felt only a cold determination to see the working through to completion, regardless of what it might cost him personally.
Begin the invocation,
he commanded, his voice amplified by magical techniques that carried his words to ritual sites scattered across hundreds of miles.
Let all who serve the Queen's will add their powers to the great working. Today, we tear open the gates of eternity and bring our goddess home to the realm that is rightfully hers.
The response was immediate and overwhelming, as cult members across dozens of sites began channeling their life force into magical workings that connected them to the primary ritual. The energy flow was visible as streams of sickly light that rose from each site and arced through the sky toward the Well of Dragons, creating a web of power that could be seen from vast distances, and that made the very air crackle with barely contained forces. But the true scope of what was happening became apparent only when the preliminary invocations reached their crescendo, and the Crimson Protocols began to draw power from sources that went far beyond the cult's own membership. The magical framework they had constructed was designed to tap into the life force of every living thing within its area of effect, converting the essence of countless creatures into raw energy that could be used to tear holes in reality itself. The effect spread outward from each ritual site like a plague made of magical energy, draining the vitality from everything it touched with ruthless efficiency. Plants withered and died in seconds, their life force ripped away by forces that recognized no distinction between willing participants and innocent bystanders. Animals collapsed where they stood, their bodies left as empty husks, while their life energy flowed through the magical channels toward the central ritual. Humans and other intelligent creatures proved more resistant to the energy drain, but only temporarily. The protocol had been designed to overcome even the strongest natural defenses, gradually wearing down resistance until even the most powerful individuals could no longer maintain their independence from the magical network that sought to consume them. Reports began flowing in from the network of scrying devices that monitored the ritual's progress, painting a picture of devastation that exceeded even the cult's most optimistic projections. Entire forests had been reduced to lifeless wastelands in a matter of hours. Lakes and rivers ran red with the remains of aquatic life that had been stripped of its vital essence. Cities and towns found themselves surrounded by expanding circles of death that moved with the slow inevitability of incoming tide.
The energy accumulation is proceeding ahead of schedule,
Frulam Mondath reported, her voice carrying no trace of emotion despite the magnitude of the destruction her words described.
We have achieved sufficient power to begin the primary opening sequence 2 hours earlier than originally calculated.
Severin absorbed this information with the mechanical efficiency that had replaced his human capacity for thought and feeling. The earlier schedule was advantageous because it would give their enemies less time to organize effective countermeasures. But it also increased the risk of magical instabilities that could compromise the ritual's ultimate success. The decision required balancing multiple factors that existed in constant tension with each other. Moving too quickly could result in cascade failures that would waste all the energy they had accumulated. But waiting too long risked giving their opponents the opportunity to mount some form of effective interference. His transformed consciousness processed these variables with inhuman speed and precision, arriving at a conclusion that felt inevitable rather than chosen.
Initiate the opening sequence,
he decided, his words triggering magical responses throughout the network of sites that had been prepared for this moment.
All sites report readiness. Begin the primary incantation.
What followed was less spellcasting in any conventional sense than a fundamental assault on the nature of reality itself. The magical energies that had been accumulating for hours were suddenly focused into workings that sought to tear open permanent gateways between the material plane and the Nine Hells, creating openings that would allow Tiamat to bring her full divine power into a realm that had never been meant to contain such forces. The immediate effects were visible tears in the fabric of space that revealed glimpses of realms where different laws of physics applied and different forms of existence were possible. Through these gaps, tentacles of pure malevolent energy began to seep into the material world, seeking suitable vessels for the consciousness that sought to use them as anchors for a more substantial manifestation. But the ritual's success also triggered automatic responses from forces that had been established specifically to prevent such catastrophic magical workings. Ancient wards had been placed around the world by powers whose names had been forgotten, suddenly activated, their defensive systems recognizing the threat and beginning countermeasures that had not been used for millennia. The conflict between the cult's opening rituals and the automated defensive systems created magical instabilities that threatened to tear apart the local fabric of reality entirely. Space and time began to behave unpredictably around the ritual sites, with some areas experiencing rapid temporal acceleration, while others became locked in moments that repeated endlessly.
We're detecting dimensional instabilities,
Azbara Jos reported, his multidimensional consciousness allowing him to perceive problems that were invisible to more conventionally configured awareness.
The ancient defenses are more sophisticated than our calculations predicted. We need additional power to overcome them.
Severin made the decision that sealed the fate of thousands of cult members who had thought themselves safe from the ritual's power requirements.
Activate the secondary reserves,
he commanded, triggering magical workings that began draining life forces from the cult's own supporters, converting their very existence into energy that could be used to overcome the defensive systems that stood between them and their goal. The betrayal was absolute and immediate, as cult members across the continent found themselves being consumed by the very ritual they had devoted their lives to supporting. But their training in absolute obedience prevented most of them from resisting, even as they felt their life force being ripped away to serve purposes they had never fully understood. The additional power was sufficient to overwhelm the ancient defenses, at least temporarily. The tears in reality widened, becoming gaping wounds through which increasingly substantial portions of infernal energy began to flow. The landscape around each ritual site was transformed into something that belonged more to nightmares than to any earthly realm, as the fundamental laws that govern the material plane began to give way to principles that operated according to the will of malevolent powers. And, through the largest of the dimensional rifts, something vast and terrible began to take shape, its form too large and too alien for human senses to fully comprehend. Tiamat was beginning her return to the material plane, her divine consciousness seeking suitable vessels among the transformed landscape that her servants had prepared for her arrival. The ritual was succeeding, but its success was creating exactly the kind of cosmic catastrophe that even the cult's most fanatical members had never truly comprehended. They had opened a door that should never have been opened, and now they were discovering that they had no way to control what came through. The final phase of the ritual was about to begin. And with it, the transformation of the world into something that none of its current inhabitants would recognize as home. And so, this tale draws to a close. Though its echoes may linger in your dreams, the fire burns lower now. But don't despair. I've countless more stories waiting to be shared with you. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you why magic still matters in this mundane world, then please, light your own beacon. That glowing thumbs up tells the spirits of story that our fellowship grows stronger. Subscribe to join our circle permanently and ring that notification bell. That way, you'll know the moment I return with new chronicles. The fire burns brightest when more souls gather around it. Wouldn't you agree? Now, if that's the case, share this tale with another weary soul who needs it, reminding them adventure still exists. Tag a friend who would appreciate a good story by the fire. The more who believe, the more real these worlds become. And, if you're new to our hearth, explore the playlist of chronicles that I've gathered. Tales of heroes and villains, love and loss, magic and mystery. Each one carefully chosen for souls like yours. Until the fire calls us together again, may your own adventures be worthy of legend. And may you never lose the wonder that brought you here tonight. Travel or sleep well, brave soul. The long rest awaits your return.